मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम। औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम। बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। इन्ना अतैनाकल कौसर फसल्लि लिरब्बिका वन्हर इन्ना शानियका हुवल अबतर। सदक़ल्लाहुल अलीयुल अज़ीम। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद। आखिरी सलाम, आखिरी सलाम, आखिरी सलाम, आखिरी सलाम। मेरी सकीना इस तरह न रोना, मेरी सकीना इस तरह न रोना। तुम जाओ कहाँ अल्लाह जाने, मकतल में रहें किस हाल में हम। तुम जाओ कहाँ अल्लाह जाने, मकतल में रहें किस हाल में हम। अब ख्वाब में बाबा आएंगे, अब ख्वाब में बाबा आएंगे, चाहे शाम का वो जिंदा होए। मेरी सकीना इस तरह न रोना। हम जाते हैं मिलने बाबा से, अब लौट के हमको आना नहीं। कुछ देर लिपट जा सीने से, फिर बाप का सीना मिलना नहीं। सो जाना जहाँ फूफियाँ कह दें, सो जाना जहाँ फूफियाँ कह दें, चाहे शाम का वो जिंदा होए। मेरी सकीना इस तरह न रोना। जाने दे मुझे मैदान की तरफ, देना ये तुझे कुर्बानी है। राहवार के मेरे पाँव न पड़, मेरी बच्ची तू सैदानी है। जीना है तुझे ज़हरा की तरह, जीना है तुझे ज़हरा की तरह, चाहे शाम का वो जिंदा होवे। मेरी सकीना इस तरह न रोना। आ पोंछ ले आंसू आँखों से, तू देख ले चेहरा बाबा का। कल हो सकता है आ ना सके, पहचान में चेहरा बाबा का। हम साथ तेरा ना छोड़ेंगे, हम साथ तेरा ना छोड़ेंगे, चाहे शाम का वो जिंदा होवे। मेरी सकीना इस तरह न रोना। बेरहम ये लश्कर शाम का है, हर जुल्म सितम को सह लेना। बचना है तमाचों से जो तुम्हें, खुद कान के मोती दे देना। बस ना दे अली पढ़ती रहना, बस ना दे अली पढ़ती रहना, चाहे शाम का वो जिंदा होवे। मेरी सकीना इस तरह न रोना। अब्बास का दिल अकबर की बहन जिस वक्त बंधे गर्दन में रसन, तुम बाबा बाबा मत कहना, तड़पेगा मेरा बेगोर बदन, असगर की तरह से चुप रहना, असगर की तरह से चुप रहना, चाहे शाम का वो जिंदा होवे मेरी सकीना। इस तरह न रोना ना मेरी बच्ची ना, इस तरह न रोना। आखिरी सलाम, आखिरी सलाम, सलाम।
मरसिया पेश करता हूँ शहादत बीबी सकीना सलामुल्लाह अलैहा। समात फरमाइए बावाज़ बुलंद सलवात। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला व आले मोहम्मद व अज्जिल फरजहुम। जब दागे बेकसीना सकीना उठा सकी और दर्द दिल न खौफ के मारे सुना सकी, खाए तमाचे शिमर के जब तक के खा सकी। सिन कम था दुख बहुत थे ना बर्दाश्त ला सकी, सिन कम था दुख बहुत थे ना बर्दाश्त ला सकी। रोई तो जालिमों ने जफा बेशुमार की, आखिर ये जबर देख के मौत इख्तियार, आखिर ये जबर देख के मौत इख्तियार की। गर आह की तो शिमर पुकारा खामोश हो, और चुप हुई तो बेपिदरी ने कहा कि रो। गए शिद्दते अतश से पुकारी के पानी दो, गए याद करके रह गई बाबा की प्यास, गए याद करके रह गई बाबा की प्यास। सोई जो आंसू पोंछ के चश्मे पुराब से, है हुसैन कह के फिर उठी, है हुसैन कह के फिर उठ बैठी खा, है हुसैन कह के फिर उठ बैठी खा। अब दिल में समा गया था जो शिमरे लई का डर, सोने में कांप कांप के ये कहती थी रात भर, फरियाद छीनता है गौहर शिमरे बेगौहर। आता है इब्ने साद छिपूं जा के मैं किधर, ज़ैनब फूफी संभालो कलेजा धड़कता है, सज्जाद भाई देखो ये खूली घुरक, सज्जाद भाई देखो ये खूली घुरक, सज्जाद भाई देखो ये खूली घुरक। जब प्यास लगती रोके चचा को पुकारती, दुखते झुकान शाहे खुदा को पुकारती। आता न जब कोई तो खुदा को पुकारती, जीने से तंग होके खजा को पुकारती। कहती थी ना चचाना इमामे उमम रहे, रुलवाने को अदू रहे रोने को हम, रुलवाने को अदू रहे, रुलवाने को अदू रहे रोने को हम रहे। चुप थी तो चुप थी बोलती जो थी डरी हुई, वहाँ शिम्र आया तन में इधर थर थरी हुई। थी आह बाह बात बात में लपर धरी हुई, गर्दन की रीसमा लहू से भरी हुई। दम रुकने लगता था तो रसन खोल देते थे, बाहर जो शुम्र बोलता तो बांध लेते, बाहर जो शुम्र बोलता तो बांध ले। हाले शबे वफाते सकीना है यादगार, गोया के अपनी मर्ग थी बेकस बे आश्कार। मिलती थी शाम से वो गले सब के बार बार, माँ की बलाएं लेती थी वो माँ की गमखजार। तस्लीम को फुपी की कभी सर झुकाती थी बेखता पे सबसे खता बख्शवा, थी बेखता पे सबसे खता बख्शवा। थी जिंदा से कहती थी ये कभी वो असीर गम, हो जाएगा कल एक तेरा में मान कम। मैयत किसी की नन्ही सी निकले की सुबह दम, बानों से ये खिताब कभी था बचश्म नाम। एक ताज़ा मौत होगी नबी के घराने में, अम्मा लुटोगी आज की शब खैत खां, अम्मा लुटोगी आज की शब खैत खां। अब क्या लुटोगी माल नहीं ज़र नहीं रहा, अकबर नहीं रहा अली असगर नहीं रहा। रहने को खैत खाना मिला घर नहीं रहा, हाथों में रीसमा बंदी जेवर नहीं रहा। दौलत है कौन सी जिसे जिंदा में खोएगी, रोना था जिसको रो चुकी अब किसको रो, रोना था जिसको रो चुकी अब किसको रो। अब मौत मेरी सबको मुबारक करे खुदा, मरते ही मेरे कैद सब कुनबा हो रहा। जाता रहे बुखार बरादर का बेदवा, जन्नत को हम रवा हुए मदीने को अखरबा। गुल हो सकीना लेके बला सबकी मर गई, हैदर की पोती मुश्किलें आसान, हैदर की पोती मुश्किल। गुल हो सकीना लेके बला सबकी मर गई, हैदर की पोती मुश्किलें आसान, हैदर की पोती मुश्किलें आसान कर गई। सलवात अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मदिन व आले मुहम्मद।
बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात। ये मजलिसों का सिलसिला जो जारी था 3 मजलिसों का, इसकी आज आखिरी मजलिस है और हम मौलाना साहब के तहे दिल से शुक्रगुजार हैं कि वो यहाँ पर तशरीफ़ लाए और एक अच्छी मजलिस सुनने का मौका दिया मोमिनीन को। और हमारी दुआ यही कि मौला इनको सेहत याबी के साथ ज़िंदगी दे और इसी तरीके से ज़िक्र अहले बैत करते रहें। बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात। ये ऐलान ज़रूर समात फरमा लें आप लोग के कमिंग फ्राइडे को अगस्त 16 यहाँ बच्चों के जुलूस का इनेकाद किया जा रहा है, जो कि मजलिस होगी शाम में इसी तरीके से। उसके बाद जो जुलूस उठाएगा जो 3 to 9 ईयर्स ओल्ड, 3 से 9 साल के बच्चों के लिए ये जुलूस होगा। मगर मोमिनीन से इल्तिमास है कि आप लोग भी ज़रूर आइएगा अपने बच्चों को लेकर, ताकि उनकी हौसला अफजाई हो। बच्चों की आपका भी होना ज़रूरी है। तो आपसे गुजारिश है कि और तमाम जो 3 से 9 साल तक के बच्चे हैं, मगर बड़े बच्चे भी आ सकते हैं, उसमें शिरकत कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि जुलूस है ये और यही आने वाले वक्तों का हमारा सरमाया है। तो आपसे गुजारिश है कि इसमें शिरकत ज़रूर करें। बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवा। ज़माना बुलंद तर सलवार।
اللهم صل على محمد رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat for ta'ajil faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Our goal across these 3 nights has been to discuss some of the affairs of the concept of the Majlis, the events of the history of the Majlis, and what it is that we commemorate and how we commemorate. In the effort again to repeat, our initial effort was that to answer some of the questions of the why, that when we perform these majalis, what is the significance and what are we trying to achieve? Bringing tonight's conversation to the complete fruition of this discussion, the first thing that we want to talk about is what is a mu'jizah? What is a miracle and when does it happen? This conversation on the miracle and the significance of the miracle is something that in today's scientific environment is very questionable, because the principle of the miracle violates the laws of science. And there are those who will argue and discuss and say that no, it does not, and others who say yes, that it does. But the fundamental of a mu'jizah is that it has to violate the laws of science and physics. And then once we understand that why it does this, the next question and conversation is, when does this happen? A mu'jizah, or a miracle, has to violate the laws of science. And it is an event that cannot be explained by anything that exists within physical reality. Why? It has to exist outside of the bounds of science because science represents the laws and the systems that exist within this world. Everything that exists within this world exists on 3 planes simultaneously: time, space, and material. Everything that exists in the world requires a time where it is present and a time where it is absent, a place where it is present and a place where it is absent, and something that it is made out of, material, and something that it is not made out of. Anything and everything that exists quantifies on all 3 of these elements simultaneously. There is nothing that takes time but does not take space. There's nothing that takes space that does not take material. There's nothing that takes material that does not take space and time. All 3 of these elements, because they are required for something to exist, anything that exists, and this is called a relative being, because it is relative to space, it is relative to time, and it is relative to material. Everything, except one thing, exists outside of all of this, and that is Allah. Because Allah is absolute, and there is nothing that causes Allah to exist, and there is nothing that can be measured against Allah. Anything that exists in all 3 of these elements is a relative being, and Allah is the absolute that requires nothing to exist. Which is why sometimes people will ask a bad question. For example, can Allah make a rock so big that He can't lift it? The question is bad, Because the rock exists in time, space, and material. And Allah cannot be measured in time, space, or material. Understanding this principle, a miracle is how we know that an absolute exists, that someone who invented this relationship of time, space, and material exists outside of time, space, and material, that he demonstrates his presence by breaking the rules of time, space, and material, by making that which is otherwise impossible in reality to exist, points to the fact that someone exists outside and brings about the creation that exists within this realm. Which is why a mu'jiza, a true miracle, is something that can never be replicated and violates the principles of time, space, and material. Once we come to this conclusion of what is a miracle, we can see that when, for example, Musa alayhi salam takes yadil bayda, takes his hand, puts it into his shirt, and then when he pulls it out, it is white with a light. That is physically impossible by the rules of science, which is why it proves that someone exists outside of the bounds of science, who can manipulate all of the elements that exist in this world. When we see Isa alayhi salam born in such a way that there is no father associated, we know that it breaks the rules of time, space, and material to bring him into existence. Thus, it proves that Allah is present outside of this limitation. Had there been that Allah cannot violate these principles of time, space, and material, He would not be Allah, because that would mean that someone brought Him into existence as well. Whenever Allah uses a miracle, it violates these principles that no other being in any time or place can recreate what Allah created. What Allah does, no one else can do, because everything else will be relative and bound by the rules of time, space, and material. This is what a miracle is. To show that when, for example, Isa turns clay into a bird, it's a violation of material. One can't become another. Inanimate became animate. Something dead became alive. Violated the rules of logic and science and what exists in this world. This is what a miracle is. That if something is truly a miracle, it has to break the bounds of relativity. Then the question comes that when does this happen? A mu'jiza or a miracle does not happen when we want it. And it does not happen by the discretion of the one who Allah gives this ability. For example, a ma'soom does not say, oh, I wish I had a pizza, and performs a miracle to make a pizza appear. An imam does not say, it'd be nice to, for example, go to Bermuda today, na'uzubillah, and then gets up and all of a sudden he's in Bermuda and there you go, a miracle happened. A miracle happens when it is necessary to do one of two things. Prove the religion of Islam or defend the religion of Islam. Look at back all of the Anbiya. Every instance of a miracle will be either to take someone who doesn't believe and show them that someone exists outside of the bounds of reality, or that when someone contests the fact that someone exists outside of the bounds of reality, to prove that there is someone outside of the bounds of reality. When Ibrahim was going to be thrown into the fire, Ibrahim was the one who went and he broke the idols. And when they questioned who broke the idols, Ibrahim said, the biggest one still has its head, ask the big one. They said, how can the big one answer us? He disproved the element that these idols could be a god, because he proved the fact that they couldn't speak. But then the question was, then why did Ibrahim do it? Allah then proved that there is a God of Ibrahim by when he was thrown into the fire. Ya naru kuni bardan wa salama. O fire, become cold and peaceful for Ibrahim. That which was physically impossible proved that there is someone present over Ibrahim that could exist outside of the bounds of everything that makes sense, and could prove that there is a creator that deserves to be worshipped, that is not limited by what is created. And this is the fundamental of what is a miracle and when it exists. When we see an imam perform a miracle, it will be for one of these two reasons. That there is someone who doesn't believe in the existence of Allah and the imam needs to prove it, Or two, someone has challenged and said that Allah is not there and the Imam has to prove that Allah is there. Do you guys want an example? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. A man comes to Amir al-Mu'minin and he says, I have knowledge of that which no one has. And if you are truthful, then show to me that you have more knowledge than I possess. Imam Ali says, no problem. Man says, will I ask first or will you ask first? Imam Ali says, let me ask first. Imam Ali says, what's in my hand? The man now looks at the hand of Amir al-Mu'mineen and he stays silent. Imam Ali says, if you don't know, don't worry, I'll tell you. He says, no, I know what's in your hand. I don't know how it got there. Imam Ali says, then tell me what's in my hand. He says, in your hand is the egg of a bird that lives on a mountain that no one has climbed and no one has ever seen that bird. But I don't know how it got into your hand if no one's ever seen the bird and no one's ever climbed the mountain. Imam Ali says, you're correct. Now let me ask you again. Now what's in my hand? Again, the man doesn't reply. Imam Ali says, if you don't know, you don't know, it's okay. The man says, no, I know. That egg has now been returned to its nest on top of the mountain that no one has climbed and belongs to a bird that no one has seen. Meaning demonstrating the authority of the Imam is showing and using the miracle that one who doubted and didn't believe in the existence of Allah now sees that which is mahal and impossible for a person to perform, to believe in the existence of Allah. When it was the time of our Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, our Prophet performed many miracles, literal miracles. Why? To prove to the people that Allah exists. When the polytheists brought their idol with them to question and to compete with the Prophet, and they said, you must show us a miracle, something that violates the rules of reality, to prove to us that your God is greater than ours. Rasulullah motions and the cabinet opens, the idol comes out and says, I worship the God of Muhammad, then why do you deny him? It was a demonstration of what is the purpose of this risalat, and to prove to humanity that Allah is present. This is the fundamental of a miracle of why it exists. Now let's proceed to the topic of discussion, which will be answered in 3 questions. You guys ready? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You're going to need this information. Don't forget it. We're going to need it in a little bit. The verse that we began our discussion with is the 9th verse of Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th chapter of the Holy Quran. This surah's revelation takes place in the life of our Holy Prophet when the mushrikeen of Mecca came to the conclusion that we need to validate, is this prophet real or not? And they came to the conclusion, they said that the Jews in their books have descriptions of the Anbiya. And the polytheists of Mecca made a decision to take a delegation and send it to the city of Najran, where some old rabbis used to live. And they sent this delegation to Najran and said, ask those rabbis, how do we know if a prophet is real? And sure enough, these 2 or 3 people from polytheists from Mecca go to the city of Najran, they meet with the rabbis, and the rabbis say, if this man is a prophet, ask him 4 questions. 3 he will be able to answer. The 4th, if he's a real prophet, he can't answer. And if he answers it, he's a liar. So I said, okay, tell us these questions. They said, first, ask him about the story of the pious who ran in fear for their lives and how many were there. 2, ask them who was the teacher of Musa. 3, ask him about the one who had control of the east and the west of the world. And 4, ask him about the soul. So they came back from Najran and they proceeded to the city of Mecca, and they went to the Holy Prophet and they planned this and they posed the question to the Holy Prophet, answer these 4 questions for us. Now within the explanation of this, there is an elaboration that says that our Prophet said to them, come tomorrow and I will give you the answer. They said, okay. Tomorrow came, the Prophet didn't have the answer. 2 days, 3 days, in some narrations 2 weeks passed, in some narrations 40 days passed. And at the end of 40 days or 2 weeks, when Jibreel comes and brings the answer to these questions, Rasulullah asks and says, why did it take you so long, Ya Jibreel? Now, there are two structures to this narration. One, that Jibreel says to Rasulullah, and he says, we only act when Allah commands us to. And the other is that we only command by the will of Allah. The instruction here is that any item, that affair that we wish to achieve, we should always partner with the phrase, Insha'Allah, with the will of Allah. Not the desi Insha'Allah, the real Insha'Allah. The instruction was for society. It's not that the Prophet didn't know, but that for society to learn that whenever you make a commitment to accomplish a goal, include that it is completed by the will of Allah, and that whenever Allah declares, the affair is settled. And so the answer to these four questions is given in Surah Kahf. And the revelation of Surah Kahf comes to answer these four questions. Which is why the first part of Surah Kahf talks about the Ashab Kahf, those pious people who ran away from a king who was a polytheist and tried to force them into believing in idols, and they ran away to protect their faith. Two, who was the teacher of Musa? And the teacher of Musa was Khizr alayhi salam, that we mentioned yesterday. That when Khizr made the claim that he was the most knowledgeable in the world, Allah revealed to him his servant Khizr. And Khizr then educates him through the process of the sinking of the ship, the killing of the boy, and the rebuilding of the wall, and shows that the knowledge of Musa was limited and the knowledge of Khizr was greater. We mentioned this yesterday, that knowledge is the priority upon which the authority of Allah is established. The third question was about the one who had control of the east and the west, and this is the mention of Dhul Qarnayn, was discussed in Surah Al-Kahf as well too. And finally, the question about the soul. When they asked about the soul, the Prophet replies, in the Quran tells him, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. That if they ask you about the soul, tell them the soul is from the command of Allah, and we do not give you knowledge except for a little bit on this matter. In this way, the Prophet established and developed and responded to these people in a perfect solution that answered their questions and gave information, knowledge, and education to us about the affairs that existed before, and elaborated on the points that came in the religion of the Bani Israel, of the Masih, and eventually the completion of the Kitab in the example of Quran and Islam. This surah, and khususan this verse, is associated with the event of Karbala. That it's said that after the event of Karbala, when the Sibaya, when the women and children were taken prisoners, and the head of Imam Hussain was mounted on a spear, they said we would hear the head of Hussain ibn Ali reciting this verse and reciting Surah Kahf. The next of our questions, that once we know the significance of the surah, what affiliation does this surah and these verses of Surah Kahf have to do with Imam Hussain and his companions? To understand this, we look at what is that is famously narrated is this 9th verse of Surah Kahf. أَمْ حَسِبْتَ أَنَّ أَصْحَابَ الْكَهْفِ وَالرَّقِيمِ كَانَ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا عَجَبًا. This verse that is most well known and associated with this waqia of the head of Imam Hussain reciting this verse narrates and in it and says, and do you think, Am hasibta, did you think or did you believe that Ashab Kahf wal Raqim, that the story of the people of Kahf and of the inscription, Kana min ayatina ajaba, are from amongst our ajib, unusual and strange signs. To understand this, we have to look at the story of Ashab Kahf. The story of Ashab Kahf is about this polytheist king who would kill anyone who was in his opposition. And he possessed 6 courtiers, or 6 people in his court who were his secretaries and treasurers, who were monotheists. And they hid their faith for a long time. And they served under this king until eventually the king made the decision that at this point in time he would take an oath to the pagan gods from every member of society. And if they refused the oath to the pagan god, that they would be killed. And these 6, not knowing that they were all monotheists, came to the conclusion that we will leave this town rather than to announce ourselves or to falsely believe in a pagan god. And that they gather themselves, and some stories say it's 6, 7, 4. And these people, they exited in their faith from the city of this pagan king, and they went to go seek sanctuary. Along the way, they came upon a shepherd and a dog, and they accompanied them. And eventually, they traveled as far as they could in the day, and they came upon a cave to rest. In the cave, they went and they rested. And when they woke up, they asked each other, how long did we sleep? Kam labithna? Labitha yawm aw ba'da yawm. We slept for maybe a day or part of a day. And they say, okay, one of us should take the risk of going into the town and buying food so that we can continue our journey. And sure enough, when they sent one person into the town, they didn't recognize the language, they didn't recognize the dress code, they didn't recognize the mannerism, and the coins that they possessed were no longer the coins of the time. And they came to the realization that 309 years or more had passed since they went to sleep in the cave. When the people realized that these are those pious men who were monotheists in the time of that pagan king who went into hiding, the story spread because now monotheism was the religion of the land, and that they believed in the veracity of this story. And when that person goes back to the cave, the rest of the town follows. But they're too afraid to enter the cave. This one man enters the cave and goes back to his companions, tells them what he saw outside, and they pray to Allah and they go back to sleep till a later point in time. The people outside see the cave, but they're afraid to go inside because it's frightening to them. And this is where the story comes to a completion, that the story of those pious people that Allah preserved and protected for their faith and their sincerity in faith. When we look at a similarity between this story and the story of Imam Hussain, we find that in the same way that there were those who were persecuted for their faith, went and left to preserve their faith, we find those companions of Imam Hussain were those who, when their faith was persecuted, stood up to protect their faith. That there is a point in time where a believer comes to where his faith is more important than the preservation of his life and his status and his security. And the same event takes place in Karbala as it took place in that time. In that time, they left to seek sanctuary. Here they stood up to seek sanctuary with Allah and prefer their faith over anything else. This is one similarity that we can find between the two. Another interesting discussion that takes place in this surah is what happens when those people come upon this grave. Allah describes this in the Quran in the 21st verse of the surah. إذ يتنازعون بينهم أمرهم فقالوا ابنوا عليهم بنيانا ربهم أعلم بهم قال الذين غلبوا على أمرهم لنتخذن عليهم مسجدا. Here is a second similarity between these two. The people Allah describes in the Quran, when they went back to the cave and they saw these people inside, they debated, what should we do with this cave now? We don't want to go inside, but what should we do with it? Some of the people, the Quran describes, and he says that Allah describes and says that some of these people said, just close up this cave. Allah knows that they're here. We don't need to do anything with it. Let them be here, hide it, and no one needs to know about it. Then Allah continues and He says, but the ones who are victorious in the debate of what to do are the ones who said, build upon them a masjid, to indicate this was the place of the pious. That the description that where there are those people who are pious is a place of the ibadat of Allah, is not a decision that you and I made to decide that where we see someone who is holy and sanctified with Allah, we should go for the worship of Allah. Rather, Allah in the Quran is declaring and saying that if you know of a place where someone who is special to me is located, make there a masjid and a place of the ibadat of Allah. This brings us to the second similarity. The same way Ashab-e-Kahf became a place of the ibadat of Allah. Don't complain that now when we take Karbala as a place of ibadah that we invented something new. Rather, it was the instruction of Allah in the story of Ashab-e-Kahf to worship Him in such places that we went and we did ibadat of Allah in Karbala. This similitude of what to do when you find or know of a place where those who have dedicated themselves to Allah, what to do in that place, it's not our discretion. Rather today, Karbala being a place where ibadat is done, where ziyarat is done, where we go to ask for our hajat, Allah told us to do this. Allah gave us the instruction in the Quran by giving the explanation that one, He tells the story of such pious people, and then He tells us what was the decision that they made the decision to build a masjid over the place where these people were sleeping, so as to seek the proximity to Allah from this location. So hence we see the similitude between why there is a similitude between Ashab-e-Kahf and their story of standing up for their faith and what to do with such people, and the story of the companions of Imam Hussain in the event of Karbala. Which brings us to our third question. And this is the one that's going to take some time to explain. You guys are okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. why did Imam Hussain recite these verses from the head of a spear? First and foremost, to understand, is it possible for the Imam to have done this action? For the Imam to do this action, it would have to be a mu'jiza, because a person naturally does not, in the laws of science and physics, does not possess the ability to recite Quran after they have been killed. The Imam performing this is a mu'jiza. Now the reality, as we discussed, of why a mu'jiza happens is to do one of two things. To either prove that the religion of Islam is valid, or to defend the religion of Islam. Now the reality of the importance of the Quran, and why the Quran, why not something else, is the value of the Quran that we should all seek. Is that imagine that the Quran is something so valuable and important that the Imam recites it in such a condition. Further to that, today we commemorate the day of Ashura. The battle wasn't supposed to take place on Ashura. The battle was actually supposed to take place on the 9th of Muharram. If you read Tariq, Umar Sa'ad in the afternoon of the 9th of Muharram takes his army and begins his assault upon the camp of Imam Hussain. When the noise of an army mobilizing hits the tents of Imam Hussain, he sends Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas and he says, "Oh Abbas, go and find out what's going on." Hazrat Abbas looks and he comes back and he presents and he says, "The army has mobilized and begun their attack." Imam Hussain turns to him and he says, "Ask them for one more night." That Hussain ibn Ali loves the recitation of Quran, loves the company of the Quran, and that I wish for one more night to spend in the company of the Quran. Today, if there is Ashura, it is because of the love of Quran, not the 9th. It goes so far as that the army of Umar Sa'ad describes and says that the night before the battle, we heard as if there was a buzzing in the sky of bees. When we went to go investigate why this sound was being heard, we found that it was the sound of the recitation of the Quran coming from the tents of Imam Hussain. Meaning the love of the Quran. Why the Quran? The Imam is demonstrating that in your life, do not be separated from this Quran. Its significance and importance is such that it should never be left behind or avoided or escaped, rather turn back to it. In every difficulty, in every moment that you have, one of the most valuable things that you can possess is this relationship with the Quran. How many of us are neglectful? How many of us are careless? The least we should do, make it a practice, 7 verses, 5 verses. Think over the Quran, listen to the Quran, recite the Quran. There is a difference between listening to the Quran and reciting the Quran. The difference is how much of ourselves we engage with the Quran. When I'm listening, it can be passive. It can be without focus. It can be without effort. But when I'm reciting the Quran, my tongue, my eyes, my brain, my hearing, my heart are all involved in the relationship with the Quran. There's no comparison between the two. To the extent where even our maraji, contemporary maraji, for example, Sayyid Sistani has a ruling on a matter that says that if, for example, ziyarat is being recited by one person, to receive the complete thawab of a ziyarat, you have to recite it yourself. Or the reciter makes the intention on behalf of everybody who is present, and then you receive the same thawab as reciting the ziyarat yourself. Otherwise, there's no thawab there in comparison to what you would attain from reading it yourself. The same is true when we talk about the Quran. The reading of the Quran and listening to the Quran. There is no comparison between the reward that is with Allah for both of these actions. So the fact that, one, can the head of Imam Hussain, is there something that the Imam Hussain should have recited? It would be the Quran. 2, why would he recite the Quran? There are 2 discussions that happen in this. One is talking about the priority of the Imam in Karbala. The priority of the Imam in Karbala was preserving the hijab of the women. There are certain masaib of what my Imam goes through in Karbala that we wouldn't know about had it not been that Imam Zaman in Ziyarat al-Nahiya explains it to us. And there are certain things about the strategy of Karbala that we wouldn't understand if we didn't know that hijab was a priority for the Imam to preserve. Let me explain. When we talk about someone like Hazrat Abbas was someone who was born to be the representative of the battle of Amir al-Mu'mineen in Karbala. Yet he doesn't fight. Imam Hussain in Karbala possesses such a weapon, if you want to call him Abul Fadil, that he is beyond comparison. The bravery of Hazrat Abbas was not that where 10 companions of Imam Hussain were cornered, that one Hazrat Abbas could free 10 companions. The bravery of Hazrat Abbas was not that 4,000 men were in front of the Furat and that one Abbas could break 4,000 men and him alone. The status of the bravery of Hazrat Abbas is that he was made the alamdar of the army of Imam Hussain, so that he would stand in front of the tents. And that if he stood in front of the tents, an army of 30,000 would not approach the tents of Imam Hussain. When you read on the day of Ashura that Imam Hussain went out for every shaheed to collect him himself, how is it that such a small group of people, such a small army, was not overcome by 30,000 people? One of the reasons was that there stood in front of these tents such a soldier that even an army of 30,000 didn't want to attack. They were that afraid of him. This is why when Abul Fadil becomes martyred, he doesn't go out to fight. He goes out to collect water to preserve the lives of these women and children that he was in charge of protecting. This is why when he becomes shaheed, Abu Abdullah calls out, Al-an ankasara dhahri. Now my back has been broken. Because this back was the support protecting these women and children so that Imam Hussain could freely go into the battlefield and not worry about what was happening behind him. The proof of this was that after his shahadat, when Imam Hussain begins his attack against the army alone, there comes a point in time where Shimr splits the army and he says, you deal with this one man alone and we will go begin the looting of the tents. And Imam Hussain calls out to him very famously. He says, "O Shimr, I did not expect you to treat me like a Muslim, but I expected you to have the dignity of the Arab." Shimr having his dignity of an Arab, and that's it. They took pride in their being Arab more than they took in their pride of being a Muslim. Calls out and he says, "What do you mean by this statement?" Imam Hussain replies, "In the Arab is a tradition that as long as the men are alive, the women are not touched. As long as Hussain is alive, do not go near my women." And Shimr says, "What you have claimed upon me is true." So they come back and they increase the attack on Imam Hussain and they leave the tents alone. Which is why in Ziyarat-e-Nahiya, Imam Zaman explaining the Masaib of Imam Hussain, my salam on the one, that when the sweat of death overtook his brow, he would continue to look from the corner of his eyes at his tents and continue to move his hands and feet as an indication that he was still alive. That do not proceed to the women, Hussain ibn Ali is still alive. Which is why they describe the fadail of Abu Abdullah, the greatness, the azamat of Imam Hussain. Imam Zaman is explaining and he's saying, you are that one who when anyone else would have been lost in that pain and difficulty of death, you did not ignore your women to preserve their hijab and protection to save them from the enemy. This is one of the realities that today, hijab is not a women's issue. It's our family, our community, the honor and dignity of Islam that hijab should be preserved, that the Imam went so far. And in those final moments, Imam Zaman is describing, he continued to move that they should not think that he has died even when anyone else would have forgotten everything else. My Imam didn't forget. Which is why one of the explanations that we can bring is to say that the purpose of the Imam on the spear reciting the Quran was that they would take the head of Abu Abdullah and place it in the middle of the women. And that the men should not, and the people looking at the spectacle should not look at the women. The head of Imam would recite. Go so far. Today, we admit and we say that those women were paraded from town to town, all the way from Karbala and Kufa to Sham. Yet find me one description of the exact number of women. Find me one description of what these women look like. Find me one description that can differentiate between all of these women. You can't find one. It doesn't exist. That Allah preserve that hijab and dignity. And one of the wasilas of preserving that hijab and dignity was through this message that Imam Hussain was proclaiming from a spear. The other aspect of why we can believe and accept and why this is a necessity is that what was the goal of Imam Hussain in Karbala? Was it to kill all of these people that were in front of him? If that was the case, then what was the point of preserving Abu al-Fadl? Why didn't he send him out into the battlefield? The goal of the Imam was not killing the enemy. The goal of the Imam was to present hidayah and guidance back to the true message of Islam. Which is why. Remember I told you 30,000 men in front of him. Small group of less than 200 people on this side. The nature of information tells me that 30,000 soldiers can easily overcome 200 people and surround them. To prevent this, the Imam digs a trench behind his tents and fills it with firewood. The morning of Ashura, he takes Muslim ibn Awsaja to light the fire in the trench so that the army can't approach from behind. They can only approach from one direction. And in that one direction is Hazrat Abbas to stop them, so that his tents are preserved. When he goes to light this fire in the trench behind the tents, Tariq narrates and says that Mal'un Shimr had planned to secretly attack from behind, and as he came from behind to attack, the Imam lit the fire. Shimr, now being incapable of launching the secret attack, frustrated, calls out and he says, "Oh Hussain, you have lit a fire for yourself in this dunya before the fire of hell burns you." Muslim ibn Awsaja turns to his Imam, says, "Ya ibn Rasulullah, I am a very good archer. Give me permission, I will shoot one arrow and I will drop him here." And the Imam says, "While he is an indecent man, I do not like that the fighting should start from me." The significance of this action is to show that the Imam's purpose is not to kill as many of these people, but to give them hidayah and to invite them to guidance and hidayah, to bring them back to the true path of Islam. When he leaves the city of Medina, he says, "I have not left this place except to do islah ummat jaddi, to reform the nation of my grandfather." This is why in Karbala, the Imam is not measured by how many of the enemy he killed, but that the message of hidayah that he presented should be preserved. Which is why he offered these amazing sacrifices of a child like Qasim, a child like Ali Asghar, the image of the Prophet in Ali al-Akbar. The preventing of Abu al-Fadl from openly battling was so that hidayah would be preserved. When we discuss and we say that Imam Hussain in his final moments of life, when he's encircled by the enemy, where they say we have never seen anyone more beautiful covered in his own blood than Hussain ibn Ali. My Imam asks for water even in that moment. Why? To see if there is some hidayah that can be given, that something in their hearts can change them. The entire purpose of the Battle of Karbala was to establish the example of hidayah. Today, why do we repeat this lesson every year? Why do we stay attached to this lesson? Because through this lesson is the concept of hidayah and guidance back to the path of Islam. Which is why we would say that when these sibaya were being paraded, when these women and children were being paraded from town to town, the layman would look at this and say that the Khalifa's army was victorious against the enemies of Islam. Until they look up and they see a head that recites the Quran. How could it be that the Khalifa kills someone and that is the enemy of Islam, but that is the one who recites the Quran? It would bring an immediate doubt into the mind of the one who is witnessing this event, that who is in right and who is in wrong. That this miracle was in defense of Islam, to show where was Islam. That if this miracle exists, it has to serve one of two purposes: either prove, or two, to defend Islam. Which is why the head of Imam Hussain on a spear was a source of hidayah and guidance. And that it was a source of guidance to bring people back to and to acknowledge, where is Islam? What is Islam? Who is the representative of Islam? Which is why the verse that the Imam recites, أَمْ حَسِبْتَ أَنَّ أَصْحَابَ الْكَهْفِ وَالرَّقِيمِ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا عَجَبًا. Do you imagine that the events of the cave and of Raqim is something that is an unusual sign? Zayd ibn Arqam says, لا والله رأسك أعجب من ذلك. Oh, Hussain ibn Ali, your head reciting the Quran is more amazing of an example than that of the story of the people of the cave. This head of Abu Abdullah was a source of guidance, which is why even in the court of Yazid, you saw those who received guidance from this event. That they describe and they say that in the court of Mal'un Yazid, there exists an emissary from the Roman emperor who saw Yazid celebrating by drinking of alcohol, by enjoying of celebration, playing illicit games next to this head, that he calls and he says, "Oh Khalifa, who is it that you have won victory over?" And Mal'un replies and he says, "Do you dare to question me?" He says, "No, I am the emissary of the emperor of Rome. My desire is to inform the emperor who your victory was over, that he too may share in your pleasure and happiness." Yazid says, "Fine, then I tell you, this is Hussain ibn Ali." Hussain ibn Ali who? Hussain ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. The Roman emissary says, "Oh Khalifa, tell me, who was his mother that I may complete the lineage to inform?" He replies and he says his mother was Fatima. Fatima who? Fatima bint Muhammad. The emissary throws the pen and he says, "Oh accursed man, you mean to tell me that you have killed the grandson of your own prophet?" He says, "Oh Mal'un, oh accursed Khalifa, between my father and Nabi Allah Dawood, many generations have passed. Yet I swear to you that the Christians take the dust from under my feet and seek shifa for it, for the affiliation that I possess with Dawood, though many generations have passed. Oh Khalifa, you mean to tell me that this head that you are abusing, this head that you are attacking, is the head of the grandson of your prophet? Oh Yazid, have you not heard of the church of the foot of the donkey?" And Yazid says, "No, tell me." The emissary replies, he says, "In our land is a location where we have built a church where one of the companions of Isa's donkey's footprint remains. And when we have a desire that we want from Allah, we go to the place of this footprint of a donkey upon which one of the Hawariyun, one of the companions of Isa had passed by, and we seek this wasila. O enemy of Allah, O enemy of God, you mean to tell me that we seek the intercession of the foot of a donkey, and you have taken the best of your humanity and society that gave you this kingdom, and you have killed his son, and you are pleased by this action?" Yazid Mal'un says, "O emissary, you threaten me and you insult me. I shall have you killed." The emissary replies, "You intend to kill me? Then I know that my dream was true. O Khalifa, I tell you that in my dream last night I saw your prophet, and he told me to prepare myself for heaven, that I would join him very shortly. If this is the path by which I will enter into heaven, then I swear now that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger." They describe and say the emissary left his pen and paper, ran to the head of Abu Abdullah, hugged it to his chest, wept over the grandson of Rasulullah, until the enemy of Allah, Yazid, killed this emissary in that location. The hidayah of Abu Abdullah continued in this way, but so did the masayib of Abu Abdullah continue in this way. Remember that in the zindan and the prison of Sham, there is a child who was separated from her father many, many days ago, who weeps and cries and suddenly awakens, crying and saying, "You told me my father was on a journey. My father is near me. Oh Aunt Zainab, why did you not tell me I can go to Baba? I want to go to Baba." The child cries and says, "I know Baba is near me." Every lady's throat is stuck that how can she explain and say that your father may be near, but he has been murdered in the worst of ways. Mal'un Yazid hears this crying, says, "Why is this child crying?" They said, "She calls for her father." "Then give her what she wants." They go and they proceed with a covered bowl down into the prison. They describe and say a covered bowl is presented. The child says, I do not want food from you. Why did she think it was food? They kept them so hungry and thirsty that they would imagine that the weeping was because of hunger. This child says, I did not ask you for food. They said, uncover the bowl, you will find your desire. The child uncovers the bowl, finds the head of her father. Her Messiah began in 3 statements. She says, who is the one that has cut your veins, O my father? Who is it that colored your beard red with your own blood, my father? Who has made me an orphan in such a young age? Such were the Messiah of Imam Hussain. The child touched her lips to the lips of Imam Hussain, and they say that she became unconscious. No one could wake the child until Zainul Abidin comes. Inna lillah. Wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ridan biqada'ihi wa tasliman li amrih. Ala la'anatullahi ala al-qawm al-zalimin. Wa saya'lamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalibin yanqalibun. We raise our hands in dua. Nad'uka bismika al-azim al-a'zam al-a'azz al-jall al-akram 10 times. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. Ya Mahmud bihaqqi Muhammad. يا أعلى بحق علي يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة يا محسن بحق الحسن يا قديم الإحسان بحق الحسين. Ya Allah, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, accept this ibadat from us. Ya Allah, give the thawab of this majlis to our marhumin, the marhumin of today's sponsors, and all those who are in need of dua. Ya Allah, we have gathered here with hajat by the right of the tears in our eyes and the mention of the Masa'ib of Imam Hussain and the mention of the Quran. Ya Allah, fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, those who are sick and suffering through our community, our families, and the mu'mineen around the world, give shafa'ah and health and safety to all of the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman. Entitle us the ziyarat of Imam Hussain in this world and the shafa of Imam Hussain in the hereafter. 1 Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas for all the marhumeen with your loudest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ya Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim Maliki yawmiddin. Na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Matim ya Hussain.
Hussain, 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 Hussain. जंगल में भरे घर को लुटा आई है ज़ैनब ऐ शेरे मदीना जंगल में भरे घर को लुटा आई है ज़ैनब ऐ शेरे मदीना जंगल में भरे घर को लुटा आई है ज़ैनब ऐ शेरे मदीना। अरे जिस शहर में शहजादियों की तरह रही थी नाज़ों से पली थी नाज़ों से पली थी सारे नंगे उसी शहर में हो आई है ज़ैनब रे मदीना जंगल में बरे मदीना। अरे ढारस थी बहुत भाई को, जिस भाई के दम से दिल फटता है गम से, गम से। अरे साहिल पे अकेला उसे छोड़ आई है ज़ैनब रे मदीना। जंगल अरे बंदवा के रसन हाथों में और खुद बेसुना के घर बार लुटा के अरे दीवारें बड़े कुफ्र के ढाई है ज़ैनब शहर मदीना। जंगल में बड़े ऐसे ओ थे ओनो मोहम्मद जो मेरे आंखों के तारे, मामू के दुलारे, कुर्बाने उन्हें भाई पर कर आई है ज़ैनब ऐशे मदीना। जंगल में बड़े घर को लुटा आई है ज़ैनब ऐशे मदीना। हुसैन हुसैन
कैसी ये शाम आई औलाद सैयदा पर, कैसी ये शाम आई औलाद सैयदा पर, कैसी ये शाम आई औलाद सैयदा पर। सजादे रो रहे हैं ज़ैनब से मुँह छुपा कर, कैसी ये शाम आई औलाद सैयदा पर, कैसी ये शाम आई औलाद सैयदा पर। एक समत बेकफन है बाई का उसके लाशा, अब्बास की बहन का बाकी रहान पर्दा। अब सोचती है ज़ैनब मांगे कफन या चादर, कैसी ये शाम औलाद सैयदा पर, कैसी ये शाम आई औलाद सैयदा पर। बाजू कहीं परे है लाशा कहीं परा है, ज़ैनब के बेबसी पर गाजी तरफ रहा है। रोती है बेकसी भी फर्श अज़ा बिछा कर, कैसी ये शाम आई औलाद सैयदा सज्जाद से लिपट कर कहती रही सकीना, ऐसा से रो रहा है मैं हो गई यतीमा। जालिम डरा रहा है नेज़ा दिखा दिखा कर, कैसी ये शाम आई औलाद औलाद सैयदा पर कैसी ये शाम आई। जब आ गए नजफ से बेटी को मिलने बाबा, जानों पे रख सर है कहने लगी वो दुखिया, ज़ैनब उजर गई है करबो बला बसा कर कैसी ये शाम आई। औलाद सैयदा पर कैसी ये शाम आई। औलाद सैयदा पर
या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन। लौट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले, लौट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले, लौट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले। दर से पानी को जो को सर के लुटाने वाले, लुट गए आले जज़ाकल्लाह। लुट गए हो गई शाम उन्हें शाम के बाजारों में, हो गई शाम उन्हें शाम के बाजारों में। एक बीमार को लाखों है सताने वाले, लुट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले, लुट ज़ारा कहती बख्शवा दूंगी उन्हें मैं शर्में, ज़ारा कहती बख्शवा दूंगी उन्हें मैं शर्में। जो मेरे लाल पे आंसू है बहाने वाले, लुट गए आले जज़ाकल्लाह लुट गए पानी तक तू दे न पाया मेरे मज़लूम हुसैन, पानी तक तू दे न पाया मेरे मज़लूम हुसैन। तीगो खंजर से प्यास अपनी बुझाने वाले, लुट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले, लुट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले। बोली ज़ैनब जो गिरी खाक पे तस्वीर रसूल, बोली ज़ैनब जो गिरी खाक पे तस्वीर रसूल। चल बसे याद बिना ना की दिलाने वाले, लुट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले, लुट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले। दर से पानी को जो को सर के लुटाने वाले, लुट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने।
या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या अब्बास, हर दिल ने पुकारा या अब्बा, या पुकारा या अब्बा, और या अब्बा हर दिल का सहारा या अब्बास, दिल ने पुकारा या अब्बास, या अब्बास, हो जाता है हर दिल में पैदा जोश वफा, हो जाता है हर दिल में ओ सुन सुन कर पैगाम तुम्हारा या अब्बास, या अब्बास, हर दिल ने पुकारा या अब्बा, या अब्बास, हर दिल ने पुकारा या अब्बा। ओ शाह फलक को देख रहे हैं हसरत से, शाह फलक को देख रहे हैं हसरत से, शाह फलक को देख रहे हैं हसरत से, शाह फलक को देख रहे हैं हसरत से। और कोई नहीं भाई का सहारा या अब्बास, या अब्बा, हर दिल ने पुकारा या अब्बा, या अब्बा, हर दिल ने पुकारा या अब्बा, या हुसैन, 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 अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا المصطفى محمد بن عبد الله. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن أمير المؤمنين المرتضى علي بن أبي طالب. السلام عليك يا فاطمة بنت محمد الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا أبو محمد حسن بن علي الناصح المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين بن علي سيد الشهداء. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن علي بن الحسين الزين العابدين. السلام عليك يا أبا جعفر محمد بن علي الباقر. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله جعفر بن محمد الصادق. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن موسى بن جعفر الكاظم. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام عليك يا أبا جعفر محمد بن علي التقي الجواد. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن علي بن محمد أيها الهادي النقي. السلام عليك يا أبو محمد حسن بن علي الزكي العسكري. السلام عليك يا إمام صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك. السلام عليك يا سيدي يا ابن رسول الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن وتقى عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل الساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل.
मोमिन मोमिनात ये ऐलान भी समात फरमा लें, कमिंग वेडनेसडे को बसिलसिले शहादत बीबी सकीना अलैहिस्सलाम ताबूत सकीना उठाया जाएगा। तमाम मोमिन और मोमिनात से शिरकत की दरख्वास्त है। यही टाइमिंग यही होंगे मजलिस के। कमिंग वेडनेसडे को बसिलसिले शहादत बीबी सकीना अलैहिस्सलाम ताबूत सकीना उठाया जाएगा। बर मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु